I'm sure if you've watched my channel before, you've seen Strafez. He has been a long-time dedicated teammate of mine and has achieved rank 1 in World Tours, the final round game mode, whatever you want to call it. Often going back and forth with Belize on the #1 spot. I'm not too sure where he will be by the time this uploads, but at the current time, he is in the #1 spot. I felt with the recent changes we've had, there's been a massive discussion in the Discord, the Reddit, or even YouTube comments about the game's meta, saying that light is weak, or it's overpowered, or that heavy only gets nerfs and it's the weakest class, along with some saying heavy needs more nerfs, and that it's too strong. Is there a truth here, or is it a little more complicated than just claiming something is OP? I felt it was important to have a discussion because it really breaks down the logic used between lower elo and higher elo players, along with trying to get to the bottom of why this divide even exists, and will there even be a solution that works for everybody? So let's just hop right into the discussion with Strafez. Thank you for taking the time out of your grind on the finals to sit down with me to discuss the meta. So I want to start with a little introduction here so that people can get to know who you are. So how many hours do you have in the finals?
Currently I have around 1.5k hours in total, including the beta. In game I have 764 hours of playtime.
You're like 300 more hours than me. All right, so what is your main role, and what other roles do you play?
My main role is medium, being the healer, obviously using the model because it's very good, but I also play every other class, and yeah.
If you could play any loadout, what would be your favorite loadout to play?
Definitely light. Light's the most enjoyable. It's hated upon though.
Yep. So there's a saying that's been around for a while that is players are good at finding the problems but not the solutions. Do you think that this holds true in the finals?
I think that it's pretty relative to how, like, if you had issues with your car, for instance, like, you know something's wrong with the car, but you're still going to take it to the mechanic to get it fixed. So not necessarily finding the solutions, but they can definitely tell you what the problems are.
Yeah, I think it's actually like akin to a lot of things in life, especially say even like making a meal. Like sometimes you're like, oh, there's just something that's kind of off about this. But then whenever you go to like a chef, they may be like, oh, you just needed some salt here, or you messed up here. Like, I don't think everybody really has the solutions. And I feel like a lot of the feedback we see kind of reflects that, but we can definitely find what's wrong with the game. In gaming, you can't really please everyone. Take Baldur's Gate 3, for example. Game of the year, but was still bashed by some people saying that it should have been like a first-person game, or that it wasn't fast-paced enough, or the dice rolls are just RNG and lame. There's no pleasing everyone, and that is ultimately okay. Even as a graphic designer myself, I feel a similar connection to game design where I may suggest a logo to a client, and they make a million changes just to end up back where we started because my original idea was good all along. I feel like this is pretty similar to gaming, where a lot of people are obviously, like we said, good at identifying the problem, but then it's like a lot of their solutions just end up creating more problems, and it takes an expert to actually know what the proper solution is. So my question is, if you were to balance this game, which group of people do you think should make these decisions? You know, Reddit, the Discord, Embark? Should we do surveys, listen to the pros? What do you think?
I think that it should come from the mass majority of players that actually play the game, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a pro, but from my understanding, the Reddit people are people that just enjoy complaining and not necessarily are people, I guess, in a way, not necessarily entitled, but like their feedback would actually matter. So like more so just people that genuinely play the game and have a decent amount of time. For instance, like the World Tour players, like I'm sure they could give plenty of feedback on things that should be fixed or balanced.
Yeah, I also feel like it's getting tricky too with all the different game modes. It's kind of difficult because it's like, well, you ask one group of people, they're going to have a completely different opinion on how it should be balanced. So I think listening to people who kind of have experience with the game in general, or even like other developers who have done a lot of game balancing who know their thing. But
Correct.
It's kind of hard to find all those people to do the correct balancing.
And especially with how they introduced this season, the TAA even being ranked, it's like they definitely have opened up more, in a way, loopholes for things to have to go through to be able to figure out what's actually going to work for each setting. Because if you said something for TA versus, let's say, power shift, it's going to be completely different answers because they're completely different game modes.
Yeah. How important do you think it is to have knowledge of the weapon stats, the gadget stats, and a deeper understanding of how the game works in order to balance the game or to give constructive feedback on what we should do to change the game?
I think it's the utmost important, because if you don't know the actual like itty bitty gritty details of things, then how are you actually going to improve or balance things out? Like knowing the damage stats or even how long things come back to reuse with your gadgets are very important. Like smoke grenades, for instance, having 3 of them and versus like flashbang, like those are 2 completely different gadgets, but they can be utilized in their own way.
Yeah, I remember seeing one balance suggestion that was like, it kind of caught me off guard. It's basically saying that we should nerf the Guardian turret to like 5 damage or something, and then it's like, okay, well that is how much damage the Guardian turret does. So it's just like, wait a second. But I've seen a lot of like weird suggestions where it's like they're suggesting it to be like buffed or nerfed to something that it's already at, or like buffing it to something that's actually less than what it's currently doing. If there was more of like a, you know, this is how much DPS the Guardian turret should do, that's a different thing. But the damage is, 5 damage per hit, which is 40 DPS. Anyway,
sorry.
Yeah, no, carry on.
I was just going to say, I feel like that's like a common issue within this game, is there would definitely be other things besides like the turret's damage.
So I have a small interview with Zafferman. So he's the one who does the weapon spreadsheet. He talks about a lot of the balancing and stuff. He does a little bit of like small game dev. He does some balancing. I'm going to leave a link in the description to a game that he's kind of working on, along with a little introduction of him. So I wanted to ask him a couple questions since he has experience balancing a game. So I asked him, when balancing, what is the first step? His response was, balance complaints usually come in the format of X is overpowered / underpowered, with or without further elaboration. In terms of shooters, it could be about a weapon, an ability, a gadget, or a tactic or a broader strategy. I'll refer to these things more generically as options. In my balancing approach, the very first step that I take is to answer the following. What is the root cause of this complaint about option X? In rare cases, the player feedback clearly spells out the root cause, and it's consistent with the rest of the player base and what they're thinking. That often is not the case for me, due to the lack of detailed feedback or stark differences in opinions about option X, depending on the game mode, skill level, how a player perceives the way the game should be played, etc. Given this challenge, I find myself analyzing multiple aspects about option X to derive this root cause. What is the intended role of option X? How engaging is this role to the players? How satisfying does option X feel to use? How much effort does it take to use? Or how much does the player get rewarded for that? How much effort does it take to counter this option X? How much does the player get rewarded for that effort? How does option X perform across different game modes, perform in matches with different levels of skill? Is the player lacking game knowledge or mechanical skill to use or deal with this thing? If nothing changes, then how reasonable is the learning curve for making experience with option X satisfying? How severe are the complaints about it? Are they consistent with each other? If these statistics are available, then what is the pick rate and win rate of this option? Once I find the root cause, I attempt to solve it in any way, tweaking a series of numbers, such as the gun damage, ability duration, tweaking the behavior of the weapon, tweaking a game mode to support a positive user experience with option X. Such a task definitely feels overwhelming at times, but when I read such positive feedback after succeeding with my balancing approach, I'm only motivated to keep going with what I do. Next, I asked him, how important is user experience when it comes to finding an acceptable state of balance, and does it even matter? The meaning behind this question would more be like, a lot of people who complain about certain things tend to feel that their experience with the game is being ruined, even if this doesn't necessarily mean that it's strong or underpowered. It might just be the way that the game interacts with this item. Anyways, so his answer is, user experience is the utmost importance. It absolutely does matter. All of my balancing efforts seek to improve it. In a PvP game, there are a few core goals for game balance. To support a wide range of preferences that the player may have for approaching the game, if I see a few options and I think they look cool, then I want to play around with those options for a long time, maybe even exclusively as I play the game. I want those options to feel satisfying and rewarding to use, and I want to enjoy my time with them. To ensure that those preferences lead to the player having unique, meaningful, competitive advantages over their opponent, nobody wants to feel redundant. Especially when approaching a more team-based game, players want to win, and they want to win in their way. To ensure that methods to counter or play around the various options always exist, regardless of your preference for playing the game. It is often not fun for players to feel utterly overwhelmed and defeated by an option that seems impossible to play against. Also, if players lose, then they often want to see that their opponent exercised a great deal of effort and or cleverness to beat them, i.e. being outplayed. With these goals in mind, I treat game balance as a vital aspect of refining the game experience, as if it is critical to the game having a strong foundational design. When multiple types of players with different mindsets can all be satisfied with their experience, then it yields longevity for the game, as well as massive amounts of replayability when a player explores a variety of options and the game supports them well. Next, I asked him, why do you think there is often a case of casual players and higher skill players disagreeing on balancing? His response was, it's true that these disagreements happen frequently. In my work, I witness debates between players of varying levels of competitiveness, not binary like casual and competitive, all the time, and it is due to multiple factors. Different levels of mechanical skill, how much mastery do these players have of the game's control scheme, different levels of game knowledge, how familiar are these players with the rules of the game, and how strongly are they working with those rules to gain a competitive advantage, different visions of how the game ought to be played in general, how much effort should it take to play the game and be successful in it, should the game be slower or more fast-paced, should the game pose more of a physical challenge with mastering the control scheme, or more of a mental challenge by emphasizing tactical, strategic gameplay. Should the game revolve around mode X or mode Y? However, deep down, I believe that these players are fighting for the same goals. All types of players want to have a variety of meaningful options to toy around with, even though the highly competitive players tend to be far more picky about the skill expression of these options. This simplifies my balancing work down to one core strategy. At a bare minimum, I try to make all options feel powerful and effective to some degree, and I want to ensure that there is an intuitive form of counterplay for these options. This strategy is not always effective since a player's preferences might be supported better by an entirely different type of game. However, for satisfying my core player base, it has been a winning strategy for me. Despite these collisions among the varying types of players that play my game, I believe that all of them deserve to have fun one way or another. To that end, I embrace the challenge of seeking out compromises between these players, and so far that has turned out to be a successful strategy given the positive feedback that I receive. Next, I asked him, if you are going to approach balancing a game, how important is it to understand the exact values of each weapon, ability, or item? His response to that was, exact numbers may come into play when comparing options with extremely similar behavior, such as assault rifles with different trade-offs between damage outputs, accuracy, movement speeds while shooting, etc. Otherwise, the effects of changing these values are far more important to understand. For example, if I decrease the size of a gun's cone of fire, that might make the gun more viable for poking at longer ranges. If that is not the behavior that I intend for the gun, then I might tune its damage drop-off curve, with numbers like starting range, ending range, and minimum damage multipliers to deal inconsequential damage at long ranges. When I deal with varying types of weapons, rifles, shotguns, snipers, etc., and gadgets, shield, grapple hook, traps, etc., then simple value alterations have fundamentally different effects on how these options get used, and I have to pay close attention to this in my work. I also cannot do my best balancing work if I don't understand how these values alterations affect the wider metagame. If the tactics that players employ to win, Since working on the game means that I lose playtime for it, I trust in the opinion of experienced core players to fill in the blanks with my understanding of the game, improve my intuition of how the game is played in reality, and make more informed balancing decisions that way. At the same time, I also have to be careful to not let their bias or my own bias affect the outcome of my balancing decisions. And last, I asked him, I know you and I have discussed Ice Frog before. Do you think his balancing methods are good? And for you guys who don't know, Ice Frog is the person who actually balanced the Dota game, and he is currently balancing Deadlock right now. So his response is, I'm only familiar with Ice Frog from two contexts. that he is the lead game designer of Dota, Dota 2, and that he is allegedly the lead game designer for Deadlock. Despite my limited experience with his games, I'm continuously fascinated by the efforts of his work. When combining the draft pick ban system of Dota 2 with his balancing approach, it has resulted in almost 90% of the hero roster getting picked at the higher echelons of esports. Given that this is the level of play with the highest level of team coordination, it's surprising to know that the pros see potential in most of these heroes. However, it starts to make sense when knowing that he often solicits balancing suggestions from professional players before game updates roll out. Since high-level players have the highest level of experience with the game, this also means that they have the greatest potential to provide quality balancing suggestions for developers. However, I feel that this approach gets misunderstood as listen to the pros and nobody else. Pros and even the top-ranking players make up nearly 1% of the player base, so they may have a difficult time empathizing with the needs of lesser skilled players, and I think their user experience matters too. However, from my experience with Deadlock, whether Ice Frog is truly working on this or not, I'm happy to say that the developers have taken great care to make the user experience satisfying at a variety of skill levels. From my less competitive friends, or in other words, casuals, to highly competitive ones that have contended for the pro level of a few games, Deadlock has managed to captivate all of them. Due to the semi-flexible roles that each hero plays, and the amount of build variety for each of those heroes, and the game's economy system with souls, I have seen every hero being capable of carrying games. Supporting a variety of player preferences like this is definitely a good sign for Deadlock's future as a competitive game. The developers are doing the right thing, listening to feedback from pros, while also taking care that the casual experience is satisfying. I hope to see this game thriving with its existing balancing approach. All right, so that was a lot of yapping I got to do, but that was basically the interview I got to do with Zaframim. I think it's really interesting to see that like both him and Ice Frog tend to lean towards the competitive side, the pro scene, if you will, of games in order to balance it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And like he said, that you can't really completely just listen to them. You still have to address the issues of the casual and the rest of the player base. But I've always found in my experience, when I've picked up a game, the first couple criticisms I have of it, like, oh my gosh, this character feels too strong or too weak. Very often, like, I get a couple more hours into the game and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, wait, maybe I was wrong. Or I play that character and I'm like, okay, wait, they have this flaw and I'm playing really poorly. Like, I'm getting rolled. I thought this would be easy. And then I start to learn how to counter that thing. And it's like my opinion keeps changing the more that I experience a game. But then eventually you kind of come to these solid conclusions. So I think that the approach that Ice Frog is doing is pretty good. Do you have anything that you kind of wanted to add on to all that?
I think what he said is actually very insightful and very true, where I definitely agree to the fact that it should be the higher tier people that give the best recommendations, in my opinion, at least. Because like you said, you will switch around and find whatever type of niche you kind of enjoy the most. But I feel like people at higher tier levels have already gone through all of those phases and figured out what actually does work the most.
Yeah.
So it's like that's where you can get the good information from, which is where I agreed with what he was saying. Like, I do think it should be from people that actually play the game a lot, which does tend to be more of the higher tier players because they've invested so much time into it.
I also find that like a lot of people who ask for nerfs for certain things, it's very telling by the way that they play. For example, in the finals, I know a lot of people, it's like they have a lot of complaints about light and being stunned, but then you look at what they play and what their play style is, and it's like they're always using the exact same build. They haven't even really played light or heavy or whatever. They're just stuck in their one play style, and their play style happens to be countered by light using a stun. Or the people that have a lot of issues with certain gadgets or certain play styles, it's like that play style that they have an issue with and think, it needs to be nerfed actually is just a counter to the way that they play. And it's like, go into their shoes and then all of a sudden there's another play style that they hate because it counters them. So having, 1,000+ hours like we do, I've played all the different roles. I know you play a lot of the different roles. So it's like once you start to play everything, you can start to see, well, this, say for example, the RPG, on heavy, that works in every scenario. There's not a time where it's like, oh crap, like, oh no, they beat me because they had this. It's like even APS, which might be the only counter to it, or like Dome Shield, it's like there's still a moment there where you can still use RPG and have a lot of success. But certain things in this game, it's like there's sort of niches where they get countered by a lot of things, and that can be frustrating. So balancing can be tricky, and having that one, way of thinking where it's like, I main this, I only play this, therefore this thing needs to be nerfed, I think is like typically a flawed reasoning, and then you kind of need to expand in order to learn more about the game.
Right, which is where I think we're kind of heading into an issue with today, is like there's been so much nerfing and balancing that we're starting to see newer weapons, for instance like the model, come out more into shine because of how much they're doing to the game and trying to like make these changes for everybody, but not realizing that we're still like limiting even more play styles and different type of ways people do enjoy to play the game.
Yeah, I actually did make a prediction about that when I was talking in Season 2 about the F-Car, and I was saying how the F-Car, in comparison to a lot of the other weapons currently, like the old Lewis and XP and stuff, was actually sitting at a pretty good spot. But people hated it because it was the best weapon on medium at the time, and I had said it would be better to buff things up to this point, because if you were to nerf this, the model's just going to take over, and lo and behold, the model did take over. But a lot of people don't really see that because they don't obsess over stats like I do. But anyway, I do want to give a little bit of a history lesson here. So when Strafes and I met, we actually met during Season 1, and Strafes actually played light, typically with like that shotgun, and then our teammate Rival played medium, and I played heavy. Then during Season 2, it was just Strafes and I, as Rival ended up quitting the game. So we ended up role swapping a lot, playing basically all 3 classes randomly, depending on the teammate we got. If we got like a heavy, maybe I'd be medium and he'd be light, or whatever. We did tons of role swapping. So we've definitely played all the classes. We've basically used every single thing in this game, like a lot, not just, once and then never touch it again. And Season 3 is where we're at. Sorry?
I was gonna say, besides Sledge.
I've used actually.
I know you have, not me. That's like a one and done.
That's fair enough. But yeah, Season 3 is where we're at now, and we actually got Kip as our third. He's basically one of the best heavies, if not the best heavy in the game, in my opinion. And so I ended up picking up the light role, and Strafes ended up going to the medium role. And we've been trying to lock in on that so that we have good teamwork, coordination, and synergy. But both of us, like I said, have a lot of experience on all the different classes. So we're going to get into discussing each class for buffs and nerfs in the current meta. I hear far too often people say, oh, you clearly are a heavy main, so you only want light nerfs. Kind of like how we were talking about before, how if you play one thing a lot, you can end up wanting nerfs or buffs to something that might not need it just because it's countering you or it doesn't really bother you at all. But keep in mind that we both still love flexing. A lot of times you'll see us on random classes. I know Strafes, even though he mains medium right now, you'll see him on light very often. And sometimes when he wants to chill out, he'll end up just picking up like a winch in SA12 or something. So there's no bias here. So let's start with the light class, which is everyone's favorite topic. So I want to ask you, what problems do you see with light in the current meta, and can we fix it?
All right. So current issues, in my opinion, we'll start off with the number one thing, in my opinion, is that glitch grenades and glitches themselves have become less of an asset for light, since we do have medium's glitch traps. And the fact that I find that very often when I am on light and using the glitch nades, that they don't actually end up working in the first place. So that's number one. Number two, as much as I love the XP, I do think either, like we discussed, the other weapons need to get buffed, or the damage drop-off needs to be increased, because I think it does do a little too much damage from range. And then things like the LH, I think the recoil is fine, but the fire rate needs to be back up just slightly. Uzi, that thing always is a shredder up close. Nothing too wrong with it. If you use it a lot, you'll definitely figure out some type of recoil pattern from it. Even like sword and dagger, I think those weapons are in a good place as well. But overall, it's more so what can be changed from other classes, I think, to improve the light. Like I already stated, the glitch trap is definitely OP and stops, for instance, a lot of sword players because they can't dash away or do what they need to do. It even stops the invis people that are trying to sneak up, things like that. And the biggest one we already said before, RPG, something's got to get done to it.
Yeah.
Because I know it's only 140 damage, but for most guns, that's still only one shot. So I think damage should be reduced by like half, maybe. Go to like 75 or like 100, honestly. Just to give it more of a balanced feel towards like every class. Because even if you had, we'll say 3 heavies, 3 RPGs and 1 heavy, that still would make them be able to live if it was 100 HP, which gives everyone like a fighting chance. But then I feel like if you did that, then you're also running into issues because then the grenade's going to do more damage than an RPG. So it really is like a struggle with balancing everything out to be fair in its own way, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously the 9-3R needs to be nerfed again.
Yeah. How could I forget about that one?
Yeah, of course. I was crazy when I saw the nerf to the 9-3R when I was like, okay, this is the worst weapon. And then they nerf it. I was like, okay.
Great.
And then obviously I'd like to see some stuff done to the bow. It'd be nice to get a little bit of buff there. But I mean, like the weapons are like, in terms of all the classes, I think the light actually has the best variety. Like you can kind of use most weapons and feel like you're not completely useless. Whereas I think with heavy and medium, there's some where it's like, this is just like awful. Like it's very inferior to other things.
Which I think like this is where it becomes like a struggle, as mentioned earlier, as to where they have so many different game modes. So if you were able to change the sniper and the damage that it does, I think that would be more impactful for people in TA versus those who play World Tour, because then it'd become a situation with the bow where you're just shooting people and sometimes it's literally just putting salt and pepper on them. And
yeah, I also find it was weird that they decided to like remove the defib and heal beam from terminal attack, obviously because it'd be too strong, but it does seem interesting that they don't really address that for Cashout. Like it's still extremely strong in Cashout, but I do feel like with your point with a sniper, it's like you might as well just remove sniper from terminal attack if you're okay with disabling stuff in terminal attack. Like I think the sniper definitely is like very strong within that game mode, that it almost determines the winner sometimes. Like who has the better sniper can basically be the reason why you win or lose terminal attack, which is kind of crazy.
Yep.
Another thing I did want to point out is I know a lot of people hate the stun gun. Personally, I'm okay if they just remove stun gun if they want to. I think that there's a bit of an overlap between the effect that you're trying to get with glitch and the effect that you're trying to get with stun at like a higher tier. Oftentimes in high elo and scrims, it's not a free kill almost ever. Like the stun gun is typically used to cancel out stuff like the heal beam or the mesh shield, and sometimes it's able to pick off targets that might be a little bit isolated from their team. But more often than not, like 9 times out of 10, you're better off just shooting the target rather than using the stun, because if you look at the TTK charts, the light loses basically every fight versus any other class unless they get the first couple shots. So if you stun somebody, they can turn around and start shooting you before you even really get enough damage in with your weapon. So at least in high elo, stun is used more for the glitch effect and the ability to stop steal, stuff like that, versus in casual games, it's typically used as just a free kill, like a lot of people complain about. So I think stun is always hard to balance, because it's like if you balance it for casuals and make it fair there, it's going to be useless in high elo. So I think it's one of these gadgets that should either be removed or completely reworked to something else so that it doesn't impact the casual experience so much and become a frustrating thing, along with it not being sort of a mandatory pick in some of the high elo scrims and stuff that we play, because of the utility that it brings, not necessarily the ability to get free kills. But I think the gadgets in general for light are pretty good, but they're just sort of not quite as impactful for your team as some stuff like medium or heavy. And in general, light is meant to be a bit more of like a selfish pick, which I think is fair, because the play style is typically playing off of your teammates and not on your teammates, not playing, on the objective, but playing off of the objective, getting kills. Once your heavy starts taking damage, that's when you kind of pop your head in. So they kind of need these sort of more selfish gadgets, things that work behind. But I think the confusion about how they're meant to be played versus how they kind of end up being played in sort of World Tour and casual games is just, it's really struggling. And I think stun gun is one of like the main issues that are causing the confusion of how it should be balanced. Because I think a lot of people demand nerfs for certain guns just because the stun gun is essentially becoming a free kill, even though, you know, we shouldn't necessarily be balancing it that way.
Yeah, which I think you mentioned pretty well was the fact that it's how people get isolated, especially within casual. Like, people aren't always in teams or always grouped up, and it's much more easier to get that usage with the stun gun of stun someone, peek around that corner again, and then just light them up. And that's because they're alone. But let's say if you did have like your heavy or other medium with you, I know personally for me, because I've been using the FAMAS more, even if I get stunned, I will just turn around because of that whole like half second or whatever it is time for after they shoot the stun gun and have to get back to their gun. I'll turn around and just triple dink or whatever, and they're just dead. So it becomes much more useless. But for the casual player, you're gonna get stunned, look around like, what the heck's going on? And then next thing you know, you're getting beamed or stabbed in the back by a sword.
Yeah.
Versus,
One thing you're mentioning is like some of the other classes having stuff that kind of counters light. And I think explosive mines are one of those things that like kind of bother me, where a lot of them will just be placed. You'll just have 2 placed in a random spot. And as a light, you just walk through it, boom, you're dead. I think what they need to do is change explosive mine to like, you can still have the radius of having 2 mines, but the damage doesn't stack. So if you stand on 2 mines, you only take the damage that would be equal to 1. I think that would help. I think in general, lights are kind of like in a weird spot where they're good in low elo, bad in high elo, and a lot of things that are holding it back are just the strength of the other classes mainly. And I would be okay with some nerfs to it as well, but some of the overwhelming strength of medium and heavy bring kind of cause some issues. And so on to the topic of medium, what problems do you see with medium in the current meta, and do you have any suggestions to fix the class?
Number 1, medium's heal beam. It might as well be some people's primary weapon. It's absolutely disgusting as to how much people would rather run in somewhere, just whip out the heal beam and start healing instead of start shooting to help out their teammate to kill someone.
Yeah, or I mean, oftentimes that is the right play too, which is kind of crazy.
Sometimes it really is. I mean, let's say it's your heavy and they're in a one-on-one fight. Best choice is definitely just get the heal beam in there, not to try and shoot, but to keep them alive, because the worst thing in like any 3v3 game mode is someone going down or dying and having to spend that time to revive or XYZ. Like, keeping your team up is definitely the most important thing.
That is like actually so true, because you have to realize for most people in a 3v3, like he's saying, you lose one person, that is 33% of your power basically gone, which is why I think medium is so strong, because the heal beam allows you to just stay alive. Your heavy might be close to death. They don't have to wait for that regen. You can just pop them up to full within a couple seconds using your heal beam. You also have defibrillator, which if you lose somebody, that should be a detriment to your team. But instead with defib, you just instantly get them back. So when you face teams that have like 2 to 3 mediums, it just kind of feels like you're playing this like endless wave of zombies as they just keep defibbing after defib, healing each other. It just becomes extremely overwhelming. And especially if you don't have a heal beam on your team, you are at a huge loss versus them. And I think part of the issue is not necessarily the heal beam itself, but the fact that it also has dematerializer and guardian turret. Guardian turret is just not that good. It's not bad for like lower elo if you want some free damage. Dematerializer, I think, has a lot of potential, and I personally would love to see it be brought into the meta, because I think it is like one of the highest brain power like abilities out there. It's like when I'm using it, it's like I have to think as a full different person, and it is a lot of fun. But heal beam is just so simple and so strong. I would like them to like either nerf it and introduce another specialization as well, so we have some healing options, or just more options to medium specializations in general, because I think they are pretty lackluster. It's just heal beam is just so strong in comparison to the other options. But as it stands, I do think it should be nerfed. Along with the defibrillator, the only thing I really want to see is the hologram not be this impenetrable thing. I think you should be able to shoot through it. That way you can punish the healer for trying to defib in a situation where they really shouldn't be, but instead you basically get some free cover. There's like also the glitch traps, which are now banned in pro scrims because of how like impactful they are to the meta, especially around scrims. But even in like World Tour, I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced it where you just walk into a building and it's like all of a sudden there's just 3 tendrils just connected to you because a couple teams have just been spamming glitch traps all over the Cashout, and it's kind of ruining the essence of the game where a lot of the gameplay revolves around the specializations and your gadgets. But now it's just spam a bunch of glitch traps and it's only your gun. So it's just kind of like ruining, I think, in my opinion at least, it's ruining the gameplay experience of the game and like how it's meant to be played.
And then as I said like earlier, like it's also removing the necessity of even having a light, and the fact that it not only disables your abilities but makes you drop whatever you're carrying, whether it's the cash box, the idol, like a barrel. It makes no sense as to why that occurs, but that even removes like the need for having a light and having a like the stun, as we said earlier, because that would also drop the cash box.
Yeah, the stun and the glitch grenade both. It's like a combination of the both, but stronger.
Right.
And it doesn't get removed, and you have 2 of them. It's
exactly.
It's very crazy.
So like that just needs it. It needs a massive rework, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
I'd honestly even be fine. I only thought of this a couple days ago, so it could be a pretty bad thought. Just throwing it out there. But like a necromancer type style with the heal beam and just remove defib as a whole. So then you have to like spend part of the healing beam to revive somebody, essentially.
Interesting. Could potentially work. I almost feel like defib should replace heal beam or something, because it feels like an ultimate ability in other games to bring somebody back so quickly.
Right? Like just one or the other.
Yeah. And then I also feel like medium is in a tricky spot. So you know Sanguine Knights. For anybody who doesn't, he's a medium player that doesn't use heal beam or defib. And his playstyle is very interesting because there's not a lot of people who do that. Typically they are using defib or heal beam, or both of them typically. And I think a lot of the issue is when people are talking about balancing of medium, and we look at some of the weapons and we say like, oh, you know, FCAR needs nerfed, you know, the AK needs nerf, or the model needs nerf and stuff like this. It's like often their logic and their reasoning is like, well, they heal as well. They are healing so much and they can bring people back, and they also have this damage. And it's like, well, I think the issue lies more in the fact that they are, you know, being played as a support role while also having tons of damage. But it's like, well, what about the people who are using it as a movement player and like, you know, essentially like a light player who isn't meant to be a support player? It's like, are we going to gut their damage? So now the only way that you can play medium has to be about your heal beam? Because if we keep nerfing the damage on medium weapons, we're eventually going to get to this point where you might as well just be using the heal beam all the time in your fight and not even shoot your gun, because you get more heal per second than damage per second. So it kind of gets scary to me in terms of like the way that we are balancing the game and where medium is going. And I think the constant nerfs to a lot of these weapons are starting to make them feel pretty bad. I know a lot of people don't really like the FCAR's recoil. Nobody really complained about the model all the way up until we got the FCAR nerf. But it's like we still aren't really addressing the main issue with medium and why it's so strong. And even after the heal beam nerf, we're seeing tons and tons of triple mediums with heal beam and defib. So it doesn't really matter the weapon too much. I would actually like to see some of the weapons on medium brought up a little bit in strength, and we can, you know, if we want to nerf the model, we could bring it down just a tiny bit, potentially the range or maybe even the damage by like the tiniest bit. I really don't know, but I don't think that is the core issue with medium. And I would like to see stuff like the heal beam and defib addressed so that we could see where it sits before we go overkill with the nerfs. But I think when it comes to World Tour, at least in my experience, medium is the most picked class by far. Like if I open up almost any lobby, there's going to be multiple triple medium teams, or medium heavy tend to be the most common team comps I see. And rarely I get to see some lights, at least in like higher elo. I think in lower elo we might see a little bit more lights, but medium is kind of in a weird spot right now. And I also feel like jump pad might need to be looked at, but I also don't know if we should. I feel like jump pad and gateway are a similar thing where it's like both classes basically unanimously, like all the players use jump pad on medium and almost all the lights use gateway, but nobody really complains about it and they're fun. Like I love having a gateway on my team. I love using gateway. I have no issues facing people with gateway. You can counter it. You can very clearly read it. When it comes to a jump pad, it's the same thing. You can counter it by shooting it. It's fun to jump on. It doesn't really bother me when enemies use it. So I don't really know where those sit. Those almost seem like, you know, crutches in a way, but ones that nobody really complains about. Do you have anything else you want to add on medium before we get into heavy?
I think like other things like the data reshaper and whatnot could also be looked at to make better. Or I think some of the gadgets should be locked to only medium and not spread across to heavy and light. Like I feel like there should be, like, in my opinion, there shouldn't be any mines on heavy. Like I feel like that should be a medium only type of play style. And then speaking about mines, I think that maybe they should make a louder noise or something, because there's sometimes where you're running up and you literally have no idea, for one, why someone even put it there. Two, you can't even see it half the time if you're not like actually looking down or trying to be aware of it.
Yeah.
Or even like I've mentioned this a while ago, but I think like grenades or explosives in general should have some type of like UI warning around it or something, like letting you know it's around, and if you don't see that, then kind of on you. But it does make it just something to where it's like, for instance, like if you're putting a mine in a bush, 9 out of 10 times you're not going to be able to see it.
Yeah.
So there could just be little things like that improved on to actually help not only just casuals but higher ranked players as well.
I also feel like we should move tracking dart to medium, because each class right now has like reconnaissance abilities where like the heavy has motion sensor, light has both sonar and tracking dart. Medium used to have sonar and tracking dart, and they also used to have recon. So medium back in season 1 actually was that reconnaissance player as well. They gave you the intel, and they basically just swapped that role over to light. But now that like everybody's kind of like figuring out their roles, and like heavy and light both have that reconnaissance in them, I feel like we can give medium a tracking dart. That way each class has their own version of that, so everybody can kind of play that role. I think that would add more to the sandbox. And also light just has 2 more gadgets than medium and 2 more gadgets than heavy, so this would at least help even it out, because I think that sort of adds to the perception that light might be overpowered to like the lower elo players, that, you know, they just have more options. They also have more weapons, and I think that's a little unfair.
Yep.
All right, so when it comes to heavy, I feel like it's kind of tricky to balance, because one jump pad or one zipline here can basically turn the heavy class from this slow, difficult to use class into just an absolute beast. But what are some of the issues that you see with heavy, and what does the class need?
I'll say, like, personal experience, my biggest issues with this is actually also on medium, with like Riot Shield or Katana, if you, for whatever reason, use them. But the like almost commando lunge you get from like sledge weapons and things like that, and the fact that it's almost impossible to actually outrun. Let's say you are a medium and you're outrunning a heavy, it's very difficult to actually make that gap or space because of the fact that they get some sort of melee lunge with the aim assist with melee weapon. So I think like that needs to be worked on, and the fact that there's times where you do get hit by it, but it's not even actually, like, it could be 5 feet away from you and you're still getting hit. So it's like things like that should be worked on. But obviously the biggest issue that we talked about earlier was RPG. I think that since day one it has always been an issue, besides nukes back in the day. But now it's like definitely a dire situation to be fixed or worked on to the slightest. Weapons wise, SA-12 still needs to get slightly more nerfed, in my opinion. I had said it since the day that they actually did address the SA-12 and nerfed it, because I know back in the day for season 2 we used to have nerf SA-12 as our names, because it was actually so overpowered back in the day, and it still is, in my opinion, the best heavy weapon. I know you mentioned the stat before, but killing a light in 0.3 seconds is kind of ridiculous, and that's the SA-12 alone. So I think that still needs to be addressed. I think the Lewis should be back to where it was, because just like the medium, we're running into the issues where we're nerfing things way too much to where shotguns really have just overtaken this meta in gameplay. And it's really unfortunate, because they did introduce the anti-gravity cube with winch, and that makes it actually a pretty fun play style to be able to move the Cashout around, or giving heavy mobility, which is very fun and not necessarily always needing a jump pad. But anytime you do have a medium on your team with jump pad, it is always the easiest way to initiate a fight. You just jump pad, RPG, immediately everyone already has half their health taken away, and then even M60 users could kill a team doing something like that, which is sad to say.
Yeah.
But I just think the class overall still needs high elite to be addressed. But it is the other issue that we've said before, is most of the time people don't even run heavy, and I don't know if that's because people don't like the slow play style, or that they don't have teams to play with to be able to cooperate with the other builds to make heavy that much of a powerhouse that it is. We've been slightly getting better towards it being like a little bit more of a support player instead of it being just an absolute menace, and that does help with light coming into fruition. But overall, it still, in my opinion, is a double heavy medium like massacre.
Yeah.
Anytime you see a sweaty team, it's either for one triple model, but the absolute sweaties, double heavy, one medium healer. It's still been the same meta since season 1, unfortunately. And that's like the biggest thing I'd like to see changed.
Yeah, I think part of the issue with heavy as well is like, I think they're afraid to touch some of the gadgets in like a meaningful way. But they've done stuff like the barricade where they increased the size, which was both a buff and a nerf. It was kind of a weird tweak. But it'd be nice to see more barricades again. But I think they need to make it so like wherever you place it, it just auto adjusts, and like you would remove, say, the far right barrier wall if it doesn't fit there, so that you can place it in more places. So if you place it in a doorway, it might just be, 2 little walls instead of the full wall. I think doing stuff like that might make the class feel a bit more like accessible. There's also stuff like the motion sensor, the explosive mine, and the pyro mine that just aren't typically used. The anti-grav cube is sort of like a niche pick where it works with stuff like winch, like you said, or like goo gun, but it's more of a niche pick that I think people don't fully understand how to use, which makes it just something that a lot of people don't really pick up. So you basically have, your C4, dome shield, RPG, barricade as basically the 4 like gadgets that people are even running. And when it comes to a lot of the lower elo casual mindset, a lot of it is around what can get me kills, or like what is going to do the most damage. And a lot of them don't fully understand how to utilize like a C4 in order to like play for drop, open up angles. They don't understand the full strength of it. So realistically, you just see tons of like RPGs and dome shields on like basically every single loadout. And in high elo and low elo, that's basically the same. I think dome shield recently, we've been kind of discussing whether goo grenade replaces that or not. I think in final round, at least dome shield is still going to dominate.
Yeah.
But it kind of gets to this point where it's like, okay, well, heavy just relies on such few amount of options, but that few amount of options that they have are so damn strong that it's tricky, because it's like if you gut or remove the RPG, you can really like ruin the potential of a lot of people who are playing heavy. And like we've talked about before, a lot of the lower elo players aren't playing heavy. And I think this partly comes down to movement. In the medium build, you can use jump pad and zipline to get around the map quickly. With light, you're just naturally fast. You have dashes, you even have the gateway. You have vanish bomb, cloak in order to kind of go around wherever you want. Like, the movement on these two classes makes it very accessible for somebody who's playing solo queue and who's playing alone. If you are a heavy player and you're playing solo queue, I'm sure you've played tons of solo queue heavy, like I have as well. It can feel really bad playing that class without a medium to at least just give you a zipline or a jump pad, or, trying to get into the middle of the fight. Like if you run into the middle of the fight and you didn't bring mesh for some reason, say you brought charge and slam, or you brought winch, or even goo gun, and you're doing your job as a heavy, going in and being the front line, and then you have no heal beam on you. You have nobody that's backing you up. You don't have any glitch traps being spammed. You don't have your light stunning anybody or doing any damage from the back or anything. It can feel really bad playing heavy. You feel like this punching bag for everybody, just this big target. So I understand the frustration in using heavy at like a lower elo. When it comes to solo queue, like if you just run mesh SA12 and you just get in people's faces and you can stay alive long enough, you'll realize that it's extremely strong even as a solo queue player. But again, that sort of is what I'm getting at, is that the heavy is very limited in what it can do. And I think that's adding to the perceived notion that heavy is a bad class or that it's weak. I think if you just use the quote unquote meta class, it just becomes this like unstoppable fucking demon that's so hard to deal with. And then you give it a heal beam, you give it that one little pocket mercy, or you know, you have your one teammate following up with your push. It all of a sudden just becomes way easier than it should be. And that's why, like in high elo, like we said, the double heavy medium is kind of the best composition. A lot of the fights really do rely on your heavy doing a lot of the work, so it's just kind of in a tricky spot. I understand the need for buffs for some of the gadgets, or even giving it more options for gadgets. We can transfer stuff over, which is why I would like to see RPG kind of reworked. I've had some ideas before and stuff that I've heard other people say, but basically nerfing the damage by quite a bit so that it's not this instant kill versus a lot of lights, and in general just the whole jump pad RPG that we see a lot in scrims. Just instantly starting a fight where everybody is like 140 HP less. It's just so strong. It's not fun to use, it's not fun to play against. So giving it like a rocket jumping thing would be really fun, because then you'd have your mobility as a heavy player. You can now at least live on your own. You don't have to rely on a lot of your teammates to do stuff for you in order for your build to come online. It would add a lot of skill gap and skill curve to the higher elo players like us. We love mastering this game, and you know, I think having a new skill to learn would go a long way for basically everybody. You could also do it where, again, nerf the damage, but add like an impact radius. So wherever the explosion lands for the RPG, enemy players end up getting blasted away. This could help for stalling steals to have that utility and that, you know, impact for the Cashout objective. But it's not this instant kill thing. It might be funny to knock people off the map with it, or increasing the destruction. And with all these things, you can kind of give it 2 charges now. So that way you can shoot one, reload, shoot it again, and you have this utility to it, rather than it just being this simple, you know, instant 140 that just isn't fun. It isn't interactive. There's just barely any time to get to even like react to it. Even as a like a dash user, a lot of people still get RPG'd. Even when I see a dash user, it's just like I wait for them to dash and then shoot where they're about to land, and it's just free 140 damage. So I just don't think it's very healthy for the game, but I think there's ways that we can rework it so that it's fun to use. It could also increase the pick rate in lower elo by making it more fun, and then also lower the pick rate in high elo by not making it so overpowered. But I think heavy is a tricky topic, because I understand the need for buffs and I understand the need for nerfs. And then when it comes to the weapons, you said it, the SA-12 definitely needs to be looked at. That thing has some of the most insane stats, like across the board. Like the way that it kills, or the speed at which it kills people is just so fast. Like the time to kill that the SA-12 has versus like lights versus mediums, even versus heavies, because you can actually hit 4 times to do 312 and then a quick melee to finish off a heavy. You can basically kill anybody in under a second. And even when you look at a lot of the other weapons on the other classes, its time to kill is faster than a lot of even like the light weapons, which is just absurd to me, because typically light weapons do more damage than medium, and medium typically does more damage than heavy. And then you have heavy with the SA-12 that like just across the board does more damage than like anything. And it's just kind of in a really weird spot where I don't know why people haven't really like grasped how strong it is, at least in like lower elo. But in the competitive scene and in pro scrims and stuff, it is used by 100% of the heavies. Not a single heavy that I've seen in like a tournament or a scrimmer or something was not using the SA-12. So it's just, yeah, it's an absurd place that I think it definitely needs to be nerfed so that it's more in line with the rest of the weapons. And I would love to see across the board, like recoil on like almost all weapons, just more accessible. I think we need to reduce the visual recoil, reduce the recoil in general, because stuff like the Lewis gun, the FCAR, the M60, like a lot of these weapons are just so difficult to use for a newer player. And for somebody like us, we could sit there in a practice range practicing the Lewis recoil for hours on end just to learn it, and then we'd be good at it. But even then, the damage values on it are still pretty bad. So it's just like, why spend the time learning this and mastering it and trying to get all headshots even with the Lewis to then still do less damage than the SA-12. It's just, I don't know. The balancing on heavy for weapons again is just really weird. And I think that's why we see so many people using Sledgehammer right now, because it's so easy. It's just so easy to use, and you still get like pretty good damage out of it. If you can land your shots, obviously the SA-12 is good, but basically the rest of the weapons are so inferior to those two options, at least in my eyes. I think the only one that might compete is the KS-23, just because it has some niches that it's really good.
I know I've seen some people being able to get some combos in with the KS, but then it also becomes like kind of with Sledge or Goo, the best option for KS definitely has to be like the Sledge, or the winch, my apologies, as to where if you shoot someone, winch them, melee, shoot again, you can instantly kill a medium.
Yeah.
So there's definitely tech that's possible with it, but if you wanted to make it more simpler, you could just winch them once, shoot 4 pellets, and they're dead with the SA-12.
Yeah.
So it's like, it is just becoming more and more complicated.
Well, I think the combo with the KS doesn't really work the same anymore, because it does 100 damage. The winch does 5 damage. So with the medium, you'll end up doing 245, and with light, you do 145. So the winch used to do, I think it was like 15. So that combo is kind of gone, but in like team play, that basically is the combo. Because if you have your medium or your light with you, you're all typically shooting the same target. So all it needs is one extra bullet, one little tiny tickle of an explosion. And I know when it comes to heavy, your primary weapon is the RPG, so you're starting every fight with an RPG. So the extra 140 damage, again, does help with a lot of combos, like you're saying. So
and I know even for KS, I've stated it since it came out, but I think the gun should have 8 bullets to a clip.
Yeah, I agree.
Most of the time, you're shooting walls to open them up, and that's already 3 or 4 bullets like gone. Then you're spending your time to reload instead of actually being more active with your team or things like that.
Yeah.
Spear, I still want to see a throwable spear.
Yeah, the alt fire should be a throw. 100% agree. I also heard somebody say that like the alt fire of spear should have been winch, and I think that's kind of interesting because it would make spear more useful, but then also it wouldn't be this annoying thing where the winch became the problem. Or it created a problem with Sledgehammer and SA-12. SA-12 was already a problem. I think most people use it mesh with SA-12 anyways, but nobody ever complained about Sledgehammer. There was very rarely did anybody say that Sledgehammer was a problem up until we got winch, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need to nerf Sledgehammer. It's like, well, Sledgehammer has done nothing. It didn't change. The only thing that changed was now we have winch. So I think winch is more the issue than Sledgehammer is. So I would be pretty sad to see a nerf to Sledgehammer because it doesn't really deserve it. And for people who use like Goo and Sledge or even like Mesh and Sledge, like some of those players are going to get indirectly nerfed because of the problems that winch is creating. But I don't know where some of the balancing should go, because obviously it's like if you're using Lewis gun or M60, winch might not be the best pick. So finding synergies is important, and balancing around those is also important. But I think when we have stuff like winch that like very much so amplifies the power of like, you know, the close range weapons or even KS, it kind of creates this weird thing where it's like we're losing the sandbox, and it's more becoming like, if you use this, you have to use this, especially in the case of heavy, where I think it has pretty limited options.
Yeah, which I understand people used, like before winch was a thing, there was definitely more of your goo sledges that were out there because they would use the goo in a way to actually close that gap. But now that we do have winch, you're able to just instantly close the gap using that instead.
Yeah.
And I do think, I understand it was a bug when they put it in, or not, yeah, when they had the winch in, was that if you jumped, you were able to actually detach from it. And personally, I think that should stay, even though I know they fixed it and have removed it. But I think that should be something incorporated within the winch playstyle, so that way there is some sort of way to escape it if you do get winched. Because not only do you get a winch back extremely quick, in my opinion, but it's the fact, like I've said before, if you do get winched, most of the time there's actually nothing you can do to get away from it. Like, you're pretty much just screwed. And with the mechanics of winch getting pulled through walls or floors, like, I think that there should be something implemented, either change those physics and actually rework it a little bit, or allow there to be an escape capability. If not, then increase the time to get winch back.
Yeah, I think what they should do with winch is like add a counter to it.
Yeah.
And like you said with the jump thing, I think a better thing that I think would be good for all elos would basically be if you get winched, it's a slow pull. So they can throw it quickly. You can even increase the radius, but the pull towards the heavy is a lot slower and you can break the chain. So basically right as you get winched, you start slowly moving towards the target. Depending on the range, obviously that's going to take longer, or it might be very quick if you're close up. But you can just shoot the chain, melee it, whatever, and eventually you can break it. And then you can, depending on how far you've been pulled in, that's where you like are let go. That way it could kind of help deal with the whole, sledgehammer being so strong with winch. And then also you can, even shoot the heavy back during that moment. This would also mean that the heavy doesn't just constantly throw winch out over and over again, but it's more of a, this is the right time. I'm with my team. I can pull them in. Like, I can make this person vulnerable. I think it should be more about that rather than it should be like, oh, I yoinked you. Now it's a free kill for me because I bonk you with my sledgehammer or whatever. Yeah. Obviously, that's unhealthy, and I think counterplay is always good. But if you die and you die thinking, oh, I had a chance. There was this thing that I could have done. Oh, crap. I could have, moved here, ran here, did that. That's typically what you want somebody to think when they die. You don't want people to die and be like, what the fuck? I couldn't do anything. I felt so helpless. That's kind of what the winch makes you feel. So it'd be nice for them to at least add counterplay. I don't know if that change is good, but the idea of adding counterplay, I think, is best. So that people have that, thought that, oh, I can escape this.
Nah, I do like the idea of being able to break the chain or something.
Yeah. So I feel like after a few videos I made discussing Cashout and how staggering and third partying impact the game, I've seen a pretty big shift in people utilizing these tactics. Do you think we will see another meta shift in how people play Cashout with these recent changes that we saw to the defender spawn? I know we've been seeing some metas where it's more about keeping that one anchor alive so that you can kind of keep respawning with the coins over and over again. There's been a weird adjustment to the defender spawn in general, but do you think that the playstyle of Cashout is going to be changing in the future based on the current state of Cashout?
I will say, from my own experience of playing, especially with these changes of 30% for inserting a vault, that there's been more importance towards other things like that instead of just holding your cash out. I don't think overall it's changed too much, but there definitely have been a slight change to how the game is played, but overall the same premises of the game is still the same, which in my opinion was... One sec. It was win first fight, you get the plug for that, and then if you can, fight for the second plug, and then if not, then defend your own. But then there's plays like splitting cash outs or things like that. Like if yours is towards the third quarter and all three teams are on the other side, then you're guaranteed that cash out, which is something I think people need to work on a little bit more, and identifying and being more aware of situations of when you can leave your own cash out instead of sitting there for the whole 2 minutes. Like if the vault still hasn't gone into the other cash out and yours has already started, there's absolutely okay to leave your cash out and go for the other vault to try and get that plug money. I know that can be a little bit difficult for some people because they'd rather just be safer and they don't like the idea of having to fight back for what they already got. But in my opinion, it increases your money, especially with kills being 500. It makes it that much more of a deathmatch in certain game situations, where it's much better to go fight than rather stay on your own cash out. So I do think there is a slight change in not necessarily how the game's played, but the effectiveness of doing those things, and it makes it that much more important overall.
And then a very important thing to consider when discussing balance in general. I know we've been talking a lot about pro scrims and high elo and stuff like that, along with casual play, but obviously solo queue is pretty different from a 3-stack. So do you think we should be separating the queue for people who are solo queuing or duo queuing from the people who are in a 3-stack?
I've had some thought on this, and I'd say if if the population was more healthy of players, I wouldn't mind seeing this. Because I know back in the day, for even like Call of Duty, there used to be a game mode, forget the name of it, as to where you could go into solo queue only games. But I do notice when I'm in a 3-stack, it is usually, especially late night, we'll say, it is very dominant in our favor. For instance, like last night, most of the games we were easily winning with 70k. Most teams didn't even have like 10 or 15k. So it is definitely very hard for people that don't 3-stack and aren't like coordinated or confident in their capabilities. If there were more people, I wouldn't mind solo queue only. I think that'd be a nice change. But I think that there's things like the statistics and leaderboards, like that would have to be its own separate thing as well. So if they did do that, I think that they should include separate statistics and leaderboards for it too.
Yeah, I feel like they could almost just ignore MMR and just do like, if you are a 3-stacker, you're in this queue, and if you are a solo or duo, you're in this queue. Because I do feel like the games play very differently as well. Like if you are in a game, you can really tell sometimes when a team that you're facing is a solo queue team or it is a 3-stack. There's just a massive shift in the way that people play. Like the medium and the heavy being together, it's like that simple thing already. I'm like, okay, that they're probably in a voice comp together. Because typically, like if we're duo queuing and we get a random healer and it's just a solo queue healer, there's a good chance they're never healing us. They're off using their gun. They're not with us, and it's like we kind of understand that that's the way it's going to be. But the meta is going to drastically change based on that, and I think it's a huge reason why heavy is so strong in high elo, because high elo is typically 3-stacks, and in low elo, again, it's typically solo duo. So heavies just aren't as strong because all they need is that medium with them, or the team to play off of them when they're the first one to push in. If they push in, they need that backup. They might be able to get one pick, stay alive a little bit, and then they eventually like fall, and it just feels like, oh crap, what, I couldn't do anything. Whereas it is a little bit easier to play light in solo queue and just try to get like little picks from range and just keep kind of like peppering away at them. So I understand the kind of difference there. So I think it would be interesting to see a solo duo queue only, especially when I just want to solo and chill out. Sometimes it's like, oh great, like I have to face this really sweaty 3-stack that is running double heavy medium, and they're just hard targeting me or something like that. Like it's a very like different game. Like the game completely changes once you are in like solo duo versus a 3-stack. So I personally would love to see those be a separate queue, and they can even open up the MMR just to do that. I know the player base count being low definitely causes some issues. I'm hoping Season 4 will increase that. But before wrapping it up, in terms of Season 4, what hopes do you have for the future of this game, or anything that you would like to see added or anything like that?
All right, so I want to see heavy changes. We've already discussed it for a majority, but RPG, that's gotta be worked on. But actually, I won't even really go over too many weapons or gadgets since we've already done that. But the overall like foundation of the game itself, like spawn locations, have still been an issue in this game. Whether it's you're spawning on a vault and there's already a Cashout in play. Like I know there's still an issue where there's only a minute left, and I'll use Seoul as an example because usually this happens on that map. But there'll be a vault that spawns in hospital, and then the only Cashout that's in the game is in mall. So therefore you are spawned at the vault, which is over 150 meters away, and there's only 40 seconds left in the game, which could be your potential last chance of getting in the game. So immediately you're already taken out of the situation. So I think spawns need to be changed. Besides weapons and balancing, I think there needs to be more of a decrease in penalty again for team wipes. Like I don't think 10% is enough. Even if you have 30k, you're only gonna lose 3k, which in some games it definitely does matter, but it's just not that much of a punishment to people. This whole 15 seconds for defenders, I don't really personally enjoy, especially when it's a triple medium, because then let's say they die, they decide they can't get their teammate, all they have to do is wait 10-15 seconds. That one guy can go run in, defib, like whatever. Like it just makes fights last that much longer and makes it very unrewarding when you do get 2 or 3 kills, and next thing you know, there's another guy that's coined in, can come right back in, and then wait for his team to spawn back in. And if not, some of the times the third party is just going to come back in, and then that team that just coined in gets to wait on the outside, kill you and your team because you just ended up fighting a third party, and next thing you know, they get to third party again on their own cash out that they already have. So I think that needs to get fixed. I would like to see defib changes like we've discussed, as to where there's like the invulnerability. That's been a big issue to me. And I definitely want to see more of the vault and cash out changes as well, like their spawn location, besides like team spawn location, because I still think those are unbalanced as well.
Yeah.
And final round. I don't know why it's faster in final round to steal and things like that. Like I want to see some type of change to final round as well.
Yeah, or just make it consistent.
Yeah. Whether that's like a certain map that you 3v3 on or whatever it is. Like I don't necessarily have any ideas for it, but spawning in, or like let's say you win the first fight, get the vault, wait for the team to respawn, then put it in. I do really dislike the idea of having to run 200 meters just to go back to another fight, and then spawning, like let's say if you do lose that fight again, then you have to spawn 100 meters away again. So you're realistically getting 2 fights max for each cash out, and I don't know if that's necessarily balanced, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, like, to not touch on anything you've already said here, because I agree with a lot of it. I would like to see some of the gadgets and weapons evened out, not balance-wise, but the amount-wise. So if we were to look at the weapons that we have for heavy and medium versus light, like light just has way more weapons. And it's the same with like the gadgets. Like light has 10 gadgets, whereas the other classes have 8. And it's like, I would just like to see those options evened out. Like I said, it would be nice to just move tracking dart over to medium. Then both medium and light now have 9, and then we can just add a new gadget in season 4 to heavy. That way the gadgets are evened out. We can even look at moving the 9-3R out of light into a different class. Honestly, it's so bad that like it doesn't even belong there. You could probably give it to heavy, and heavy still would use the SA12. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like we can do stuff like that. We can move some weapons out of one class to another. But realistically, we don't even need another weapon for light. I think we have a really good variety on light. As much as I'd love using light, we could give an extra weapon to medium, like give 2 weapons to medium, 2 weapons to heavy, something like that, because we just need to start evening out the options for the classes, because I think a big problem that we have right now is how boring some things get. Like for you and I, we love swapping classes a lot. Like even though light is probably both of our favorite class to play, I think a lot of it comes down to like, well, I can just use this weapon and with this gadget and this, and a lot of them are relatively viable amongst each other. Even though the class might be the weakest, it just has the most options available that do feel different, like using a bow to using like an LH1 to then using a sniper and then an SH and then an XP. It's like the playstyle feels very different, whereas medium, it's like you have 3 ARs that basically play the same. And then on heavy, it's like you have the SA12 and then a bunch of shitty options. So it's just like, it's in a weird state where it's like light is easily the most fun class. And I'm sure an overwhelming majority of players would probably agree that light is the most fun and it also has the most options. I think we need to just add more options to medium and add more options to heavy and make them more fun to play. And I would like to see a specialization for medium to give them some mobility. Maybe another gadget for heavy, like they could have a rocket jump specific gadget that isn't necessarily the RPG, but a new thing that just is like an air cannon where you can kind of jump around with it. We just need some more fun options for those classes and more viable options, and to increase the variety. And it's like we don't need another 4th AR on medium that just really doesn't increase the options and impact that the weapons have. So that would be my wish list. I know a lot of light mains out there would probably hate that I wouldn't want to add stuff to light, but I just think it'd be fair to give the same amount of options for all the classes so that everybody is out there being treated well and has fun. And then once we're a bit more at a balanced state in terms of options, then we can start evenly adding and distributing stuff.
Yeah, because I think there it needs that sandbox feel back to the game. Like you
Yeah.
said, like it is kind of getting stale, especially with it being the same meta for over 3 seasons now. Like this game, in both of our opinions, has always been a sandbox type of game to where anything's usable, anything can be used for fun or for good. And now we're just slowly falling into more of this niche playstyle for everything.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to sit back and watch the game kind of turn into this, but I'm still having fun, still playing it. But I want to thank you for the discussion, though. I appreciate you sitting down and talking meta with me. Can you tell us all where you can be found?
Pure Strace, YouTube, Twitch. I'd be grinding. Probably see me in World Tour someday. I'd be there.
All right. Well, yeah, be sure to check out Strafes for some top tier gameplay and subscribe to both of us if you're interested. And I will see you guys later. All right. I just want to do a quick little close here. I want to thank all my members. Comment below any discussions you'd like to hear discussed in a potential future video, or if there's any people that you would like me to have a discussion with. Remember, you don't have to be a meta slave to have fun. Just get good, and I will see you in the finals.